So, hey everyone, thanks for joining. And we've got our guest here, and we'll formally introduce him in a moment. But one thing that I found looking for more information on our guest, every time I put his name in my web browser and hit return, Paul McCartney showed up. Now, here's Paul McCartney's proxy with us here today, and I know some of you are coming in from Europe or the UK, and I don't know. Paul might have to shed some light on his relationship with Paul McCartney too, as well, when we were speaking to him. So, hey, we'll get started, and thank you everyone for joining us today. And in our tradition, uh, I first want to just say thank you. And my name is Richard Walters. Most of you and a lot of you know me from I Am Awake on Substack. And also I am founder of iamday.org. And hello, Nicole. As we had I Am Day just this last September, September 24th, we celebrated an international awakening that day, and we had so many great teachers, and Nicole was one of them actually on our day. So we were very fortunate to have great teachers on our international awakening movement. But in that tradition, we always lit a candle to carry the thread of the beginning of the day to the end of the day. So I want to carry the current from this past I Am Day to this next I Am Day, September 23rd, 2026. So these moments I am lives are the awakening currents that we shape our our days, months, and years. So today I want to welcome somebody that was introduced to me by our guest and friend of mine from last week that Bill Kirst was on with I Am Veteran. And Bill's a good friend of mine and Paul's. They met through technology, through virtual first technology, and Bill Kirst hosts a Coffee and Change podcast and is here also on Substack under Everword. Paul, as he mentioned earlier, is new to Substack, which is great to see another great face and celebrated author here with us today. So I just want to just do a brief introduction here of our guest, Paul. And we're meeting at a time right now, at a moment where the world's changing faster than the leadership systems meant to guide it. Paul McCarthy's work goes straight to the heart of that tension. Today, we explore why leaders we often sideline or fire may be the very ones we need most for the future that's coming. We're diving into a conversation that sits at the heart of where leadership is going and why so many leaders feel misunderstood, underutilized, or even punished for the qualities they were hired for. I'm honored to be joined by Paul McCarthy, author of The Fired Leader, whose work reframes what being fired really means and what the future ready leadership must look like. So before we jump into our questions, Paul, you were on a European UK tour. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. It's good. It's good to be here. As I said, it's a new platform for me, and I think one of the things that everything that I do is revolving around is this idea of awakening. And so, when Bill mentioned you to me, and I found out a little bit more about what you do, it really speaks to what I'm all about, which is how to help people wake up. Oh, and my phone
Nope,
just went to the side.
you're
So
good. You're good.
I'm still here. Um, and so the last 5 weeks in the UK and Europe have been quite intense and quite, late, early starts, late finishes. Those that are listening in and travel a lot for work, and when you're in hotels and you wake up and you don't know where you are. That was basically the common thread of having some fascinating and beautiful conversations with 25 plus individuals from different organizations in different countries. So UK, Italy, Switzerland, Germany, went over to Prague, Ireland, back to the UK. It was at the Thinkers 50 conference, which was all about regeneration as well. So very, very at the core of what we're talking about and the work that we do and my work. So yeah, it's been quite an energizing and overwhelming and exciting and inspiring 5 weeks. And I'm back where I live for a while, and it's nice to just take a cup of tea in my favorite cup and um, do some laundry and reflect on the last 5 weeks, which is all about how do we create the environment for honest conversations. We're waking up to a new dawn. um, how do we shepherd that through and regenerate and help others as they evolve on their journey? So this this topic that I'm sure we're going to dive further into is very core to everything I do in my heart, and actually what I've been hearing from the last 5 weeks of conversations, and people are wanting something different. So yeah,
That's
pleased to be here,
that's
and I
great.
really appreciate it.
That's excellent. So that was both your a bit of your book tour and also a new program that you're launching, I believe, too, right?
Well, yeah, I was partly on business with another consulting firm that I work with, called Canvas Leadership, that are doing
Mm,
amazing things in transformative learning experiences for leaders and helping them prepare for the future. And then I
great.
was also doing my own thought leadership stuff around my book and talking about the concepts within it. And the Thinkers 50 conference that I was at, obviously embodies some of the most prolific thinkers in the world on management and leadership. And I started my journey about 8 years ago on that side with my thought
Okay.
leadership and the
Excellent.
seeds of what would become a book. And so 8 years ago, when I was talking about regeneration and awakening and evolving 8 years ago, and the theme of the conference in the last few weeks was regeneration. So
Right.
it's quite interesting to be at this juncture. And so I've put a lot of my work, my IP, my theories into the book, but also now from the book, developing a series of learning programs to help organizations and leaders prepare for the future. And
Excellent.
so they're in much more tangible formats now, so that people can start to actually bring this into their approaches to leadership and living and organizational evolution.
And well, that's awesome. And just on the side note, I'm actually on the road now too, at this point, Paul. I'm in Saskatoon, if you can believe it. And anybody on this video here today, I just want you to try to say Saskatoon, Saskatchewan twice. Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. Okay, Bill. All right, I'm sorry, Paul. Paul, go ahead. Can you repeat that?
Saskatoon, Saskatchewan.
There.
Saskatoon, Saskatchewan.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've actually
Yes.
spent some time in Saskatoon.
Yeah.
It's flat. It's quite
It's
flat.
very flat. So that's where I come from. That's I'm just helping my mom with a few things here, and she's just turning 90 this next year, so she's doing great. And let's get into your story. Tell before the book started, like tell me and us a little bit more about your story. What happened?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. This is for those that have already Googled me. My story is very public, and I'm all over the internet for the story that started everything, really. And it was, and before I start going into my story, I have to be very honest, because that's what I'm characterized by, is my honesty. I never wanted any of this. Never. This was not something that was part of my plan. I wanted to fit in to corporate America, corporate North America, and I wanted to I had that corner office. I had the career, the trappings, everything that goes along with that. And I was in my own journey of waking up, and that waking up came through awareness. And so I was in 4 different leadership positions, and essentially I got fired from each one of those
Mm,
positions. And I got fired because I demonstrated the leadership qualities I was hired for. And part of my expertise, Richard, in consulting, was to go out and develop organizations leaders. So next generation of talent and C-suite and board level. So partly what I also had to do was to stay on top of trends in leadership and what was coming and how do we develop leaders for the future. And I kept on getting fired for leadership qualities that I was asked to demonstrate. So I saw a bit of a disconnect and a bit of a hypocrisy forming. And that's basically where I formed this hypothesis. Everyone said to me, "Oh, you're just a bad culture fit. You don't fit in. Can you just, update your resume and move on?" And I had this niggling feeling, this curiosity that was driving everything, which was saying, I think that the way we're doing leadership is not working. And we're seeing the cracks. This was 2017, by the way. We're
Yeah.
seeing the cracks. We're seeing ineffective systems and processes and mindsets. And leaders themselves are not enjoying what they're learning as leaders. They're not, and it's not helping them be leaders. So I had this strange theory, which would consume the next 8 years of my life, which was simply put, are we firing the very leaders with the leadership qualities that we'll increasingly need to navigate ongoing disruption? And I spent about a year of that time looking at leadership programs, onboarding processes, hiring practices. I spoke with people like chief people officers, chief talent officers, heads of leadership development, HR, CHROs. And a picture started to form, which was, I think there's a bigger issue here, and there's an issue that we're not talking about openly. And I started getting all the research sources and connecting some dots, and the dots I connected were basically the way that we identify, recruit, develop, recruit, onboard, and develop leaders isn't working, and nobody's talking about it.
Hmm.
And why aren't we talking about it? So I started to put that down, and eventually one thing led to another, and a book came out of it, a whole bunch of endorsements from leaders around the world and those in thought leadership and leadership culture, HR disruption. And it's kind of starting to pave a new path in the conversations that we're having about the future of leadership. And it all stemmed from the fact that I got curious because I was fired, and I had a hypothesis that I wanted to either refute or prove. And I spent a big chunk of my time having those conversations, unearthing research, and thinking there's got to be a different way. And let me just
Yeah.
throw one statistic in there, and then I'll pause for where you want to take this next. As part of the research, I found, and this is public information, DDI, which is the world's largest leadership development think tank that surveys, I think, 16,000 people in leadership roles and chief HR officers, those kinds of roles every year or so, found that we invest about $366 billion every year into developing leaders. And then when they gauge the ROI of that leadership development investment, it's 14%.
Mm.
So do the math, that's a lot of money for very little payback in terms of effectiveness. And very few people were talking about it. So I started to publicly talk about it. And over the last 8 years, I've built up a portfolio of work, a perspective, some tangible things like books, podcasts, keynotes, programs. And now my work is pretty much at the forefront of the future of leadership discussions. And it's all been very unexpected, unplanned.
Okay.
And I'm on a train that left the station and I jumped on it. And
Well,
now people are starting to catch up. And it's a really interesting time for the world, as we know. And it's a really interesting time to have these conversations. And it's been 8 years as part of phase one. And now I'm coming into the next phase of my journey. So that's how it really
okay.
started. My origin story was something that I was compelled to do something about. I couldn't just ignore.
Well, that's so enlightening and insightful because when I think about you said the past 8 years, why don't we even think back to Earl Nightingale or Bob Proctor, lead the
Yeah.
field? Do you remember those guys?
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's interesting you say that because I have a LinkedIn post coming out in the next couple of days, I think, which is really about the fact that I've been a bit of a provocateur my whole life. And it started when I was young in going to a Catholic school. And I asked the question at 11 years old, when are we going to learn about other religions? And the answer was, you don't need to. Catholicism is the only religion you ever need. And then that went all the way through to the academic space that I did a thesis in, which challenged the ways of thinking, and then into the corporate world, and then now with something else, which um, I have a rare disease that's growing, only affects men. In Q1 2026, I'll be bringing this out to the world to essentially revolutionize the way we look at this disease and treat this disease. And the thread, Richard, throughout all of those 4 areas has always been thinking differently. So I'm a big proponent of Earl Nightingale's work. I'm a big proponent of Bob Proctor. In fact, I've done one of his programs, Thinking into Results,
Yeah.
and the ideas that underpin it, and U Squared by Price Pritchett. All of these things have been my spiritual foundation and scaffolding for everything I've just outlined in my life, as well as the work that's going forward. So really, really important.
Yeah. And that's interesting. You talked about it, your spiritual and then scaffold, the two words that you use there for your whole premise of what you've built here. And like you think about those early uh, leaders and educators. Really, that's what they were. They were trying to teach the world about leadership. And now, as you said, it's such a disruptive time right now, and it's hard for somebody to even think, how could I even consider some of those old practices and principles when things are so rapidly changing? How do we deal with these leadership systems? And it's when you think about it, is it the people that are broken now that they can't keep up, or is it the system that's broken? What? Tell me a little bit more about this.
Yeah, I think it's a bit of both. I think systemically there is an institutional dysfunction in the way that organizations are structured and the way that
Hmm.
we build systems and processes and therefore mindsets and behaviors that flow from that. I think that we're all missing a trick here, which is or missing the reality, which is the systems that we've inherited that are dysfunctional and that are not working were created by us.
Mm,
And so we have the capacity and the capability, but do we have the willingness to step into the arena to actually evolve them? So when I started this path 8 years ago, my work was based on 5 pillars that
mm,
underpinned the way that I work, and the 5 pillars seem to kind of fall nicely into what we're talking about here because it starts with awareness. So you have to be aware that something is not working, right? So I'll give you an example just to keep this in the line of leadership and the way that we do leadership today in today's organizations. And the dysfunction that we've normalized that's so around us every single moment. You're in a meeting, and there's a pre-meeting before the meeting, and you're not invited to it. Right,
mm,
that's an example right there. That's an example of dysfunction. That's politics in the play. There's a meeting after the meeting, and you're not invited to it. Right, or you're in a meeting and um, everyone's around the table and your boss is there and your boss asks for genuine and honest feedback on an idea that happens to be their idea. And then you give honest feedback because this actually happened to me. This was one of the symptoms of toxic organizational cultures that I was working in some context. And so when I'm asked a question, I will give an honest answer. And so that answer rubbed up against someone's ego who happened to be the boss in the room, and yet they asked for honest feedback. And so all of a sudden that has repercussions in a corporate world, right? Of which I experienced. Now, my experience of all of this was never to look at it through a lens of being bitter and twisted, because a lot of people they can see their own experiences in my story and they can be bitter and twisted about it. I saw it as an opportunity because I saw it as an opportunity to help raise awareness of things that weren't working. So that's the first pillar. The
mm,
second pillar is then awakening. All right, what happens when you're now aware? I can tell you right now how much it costs every year for toxicity and toxic leadership in your organization. I can tell you the true costs from a business case perspective. Now you're aware of that, you're waking up to the reality. So that's the second pillar. This is the pivotal one for me, which is the next pillar, and that's courage. So you're aware, you've woken up, you're waking up. What are you going to do about it? what do you know, there's a reason that I actually publicly challenged the CEO of Glassdoor and the chief product officer a few months ago to develop the world's first toxicity scorecard for organizations. And it's an idea that's been in my mind for 8 years as well. And so the idea behind that is to say, right, you're aware of all these data points, you're waking up to the impact of them. What do you do differently? That's the courage. That's the tipping point. So if you don't do anything, you're complicit and complacent. And we all know people like that. You know, I'm just not that way inclined. I'm not wired that way.
Hmm.
So I went the other way. And the next pillar is the fourth one for me is okay, you've got the courage to do something about it. Now you're evolving the way that you lead. If you're a leader in an organization, you are a role model. You're an example. You're doing something differently. You're stepping in the arena, as Brené Brown talks about. And those that fire peanuts from the cheap seats to you, they don't count because they don't have the courage to get in the arena. So you evolve the way you lead and the way you work, and that starts to have an impact. And that's the next pillar, which is embodiment. So once you start to evolve the way that you do things, you can't help but have an impact on other people, and you start to embody whatever that set of qualities is. So that work is those pillars are the things that shape my conversations with leaders and organizations, because I believe that systemically there is a conversation that we are shying away from because it's too painful, it's uncomfortable, and yet it's actually us that created this discomfort, and it's us that have the keys to the solution. If only we can follow those 5 pillars and start to think differently and dare
Yeah.
to think differently. What I would
Yeah.
say. So yeah, and there are some bad apples that hide within the walls of these organizations, as we all know. And yet, if we address the actual cause of dysfunction and dysregulation and hypocrisy, we can redesign organizational structures and narratives to be fit for purpose for the future. But we've got to be willing, Richard. We've got to
Yeah,
step
for
into
sure.
this.
Well, it's interesting. You talked a little bit earlier about the costs, and then you got into the 5 pillars. Yesterday, I was having coffee at my favorite little coffee shop, and I saw a city truck pull up, and two fellows got out, and they had their coffee. They sat 2 tables away from me, but it was hard not to hear them. I was sitting by myself, so I wasn't speaking and having an engaging conversation with anyone. I was working on, hey, I think I was typing up my notes for this session actually. So the part that's hard not to hear was them talking about their boss. And
Mm,
the part that they said was, one said, I actually do things to slow things down and not work as hard or fast to get the job done. I consciously slow down. And then the other guy says, well, I know other guys that are doing the same thing. They're actually sabotaging some of the jobs, even, right? So this is in a public setting. These two gentlemen were speaking. So
yeah.
just think that leader that they were talking about, the toxicity that that must have created to have this dialogue in a public coffee shop. They must be truly seated and feeling like they have no trust or safety in their work environment.
Yeah, I just wrote down the word energy here because I think it's really important that we don't fall into the trap of those two gentlemen because they are actually exacerbating a situation. So
Yes.
they are part of the problem. Whereas at that juncture, they could have the courage to do something different. So for me, my work started again this hypothesis that whether we were firing the very leaders that we need to navigate ongoing disruption, what that uncovered, what that surfaced, was the fact that the modern organizational structure is designed in a way that's quite toxic. And I can shout the numbers out as well. $223 billion in the US alone in the last 5 years, the cost of toxicity. There are
Hmm.
others. It's 8.9 trillion is the annual cost of disengagement. That's annual. When I started this work 8 years ago, that figure was 7 trillion. right? So we've seen all this stuff out on social media about how to address toxicity, blah blah blah. Yet the costs keep on rising, and I believe thoroughly that the reason the costs keep rising is because we're not creating the conditions to have honest conversations that matter. And so
Hmm.
the energy that you expend moaning about your boss and moaning about how you work, it could be spent and repackaged into a way of having a conversation about how we'll address this, right? If people are willing and open to have the conversation. So,
Yeah.
the reason I say that, Richard, is because when I started this path years ago, people thought I was just attacking the establishment, and that was the furthest thing I was doing. I wasn't attacking the establishment. The only thing I was doing was putting a mirror up to the establishment and saying, "This is what's going on. Are you having the ostrich syndrome here, or are you complacent? Do you care? Are you part of the issue?" But whether or not you are, and the answers to that are clear, the one thing we do know is that the future will require a different approach. Leaders in the
Hmm.
future do not want the way that they've had it now and their predecessors have had it.
Yeah.
Now my energy is much more focused on preparing organizations to say, how do you address this going forward? Rather than let's get stuck in the conversation around toxics and he said, she said. That doesn't serve energetically. What serves energetically and lifts us to a higher plane is to say, how do we regenerate the conversations we're having? Like, how do we evolve beyond where we are now? And there is a global and growing global appetite for that. I mean, you just have to look around the world, politics, the way that things are unfolding, more disruptions coming with AI and certain technologies. And we forget somewhere along the way that we as humans get the opportunity and the privilege to help shape that direction of travel.
Yeah.
So I'm just creating the conditions for us to do
So
that.
So on that you said two things. You said like is an organization going to stick their head in the sand, the ostrich syndrome, and we need to place a mirror up and really look at ourselves and what we're doing. So some of the work that I've been working on is metacognitive compassion, and that's really awareness that sees awareness. So that's kind of what I'm hearing with respect to, you need to be aware of your actions, but also aware of how you're responding to your awareness. And that led me to some work that I'm exploring and it's sort of similar if I think about it to your five pillars. I've created a model called the resonance index, and that takes in three components: compassion, awareness, and safety. So I heard a lot of stuff about safety in your conversation in the last 5-10 minutes, that people aren't feeling safe. So with the resonance index, it's a measurement tool that can help that person, perhaps even that person I was talking about at the coffee shop, or the people that you've worked to and talked about in your work in the organizations, that they can now start to see their resonance isn't at a frequency that's supportive or helpful to the organization. And toxicity brings that index down to almost near one or zero, if you will. So I'm really interested in hearing more about how your program, or I guess your how your book evolved. There was something about 13 steps, I gather, like a systems blueprint, the 13 unlucky steps. What are those? What are those steps?
Yeah, I mean, I can obviously I can also share with people that chapter from the book because essentially, um, and when I wrote that section, I call it the 13 unlucky steps to leadership identification, recruitment, onboarding, and development. And I have a little footnote um, about on the title, and the footnote in the book is directed to those that are in the HR industry, and and it's a bit of a play. It's a bit of a tongue in cheek, but it's actually um, it's a pointed reference to the fact that a lot of people in the HR industry will publicly say that everything is working fine. And then if you talk to them behind the scenes, they will say it's not working fine. And so one of the things that I've found when you put your head above the parapet and you say enough's enough, and now we need to do something different, you subject yourself to becoming a public target. And so I invite that. I invite people to troll me. I invite people to challenge me
Mhm.
because much of my work is data driven. And I've fused the data driven side with the exploratory and experimental different ways of thinking about the future. So when someone has in the past, and it doesn't happen very often, but where it's come from has been the HR industry, which is a lack of self awareness of people in the HR industry that the industry that they're working in is systemically dysfunctional. So the 13 unlucky steps starts with an acknowledgement of that, but also a recognition that if you know if this challenges the way you think, good, because that's what it's meant to be. Because we're in a lot of people in the HR and leadership industry exist in an echo chamber, and there's a groupthink mentality.
Mm.
I've come along and thrown a grenade over the wall and said, "The way you've done it hasn't worked. You pretended it has because it's too much hassle to speak up." Well, I'm personally just I don't care about that. I've spoken up. I'm speaking up, and
Mhm.
I'm forming a whole new body of work that even a lot of people at Thinkers 50 who endorse my book and are at the precipice of leadership and HR, they're like, "Yeah, we need this. We need." So that whole section is about, the moment that you start. Let's say you're a potential employer, and I am coming to meet you for an interview, and it starts right at the beginning. You know that coffee shop meeting. Hey, let's go and meet in the local coffee shop next door to the office, and the 13 unlucky steps begin there. Like, and I won't go into too much detail
Yeah,
because it's
yeah,
quite a dense section, but
yeah,
I'll make it
for
available
sure.
for people that want in your network. But it
Yeah,
goes all the way through from that initial coffee shop meeting to your perception of me based upon your biases determines whether or not I get invited to another interview. Then we get to the interview and other things unfold. We start talking about the role and expectations and salary, basically the whole end to end
yeah,
interview process to appointment. And I talk about how it's done today, and then I say this is really what's happening, and I cite research and statistics, and I say, is this really how we want to evolve the way that we recruit future talent and leaders? Because it's not working. And so that whole section is sometimes one of the tools that I use when I'm talking to hiring managers or chief talent officers or whoever it happens to be about the effectiveness of the way they currently do things.
yeah.
And it's a mirror basically, and it enables
Well,
them to, because if they're not open to asking themselves honest conversations and then listening to the answers, they're not the people I want to work with, unfortunately, because
yeah.
they're not quite ready to think differently. This work, by the way, it's about it's about identifying progressive thinking people that want to do something different. So if I have to talk to someone and try and convince them of all this, um, then it's a harder conversation to have.
Mhm,
Exactly. And so I kind of I caveat the 13 unlucky steps every time I talk about it because I'm saying this will make you feel uncomfortable,
mhm.
and that's okay and that's good. And based on the data that comes out of you from your response to it will determine where you are in the system and the role that you want to play going forward. And there's no judgment. It's absolutely fine. I'm on another train and the train
Yeah.
has left the station.
Well, I see and what I hear from you is you're looking at the underlying current of what's going on in that process and really bringing it to the surface so that people can see the good and the bad of that process and maybe make changes. And that kind of leads me into your book. The title is Fired, right? The Fired Leader. And I guess that's actually, is it, do you print it fired like F.I.R.D, or do you just say fired?
With the punctuation, yeah. So
Punctuation. Okay. So
yeah,
F is fresh thinking, and that's what you're talking about all right through this whole process is fresh thinking. So tell us what does the fired stand for, and let's move into fresh thinking after that.
Yeah. Well, and so after that year of research and looking and interviewing, talking with people and looking at numbers and data and everything, one of the things that I realized was that there were five missing leadership qualities from the way that leaders were developed, and the research suggested that we needed those types of qualities. Here's where the story gets quite interesting from my side, because there's the missing qualities, missing ways that leaders need to evolve, and the skills that they need to develop, or the attributes rather, and then my experience of being fired. And so what I did, I cross-referenced and I looked at all of the reasons, and this is painful stuff, right? So you have to put the mirror up to yourself, and I had friends that walked away from me. I had romantic partners that just said, "Can't you just fit in?" I had family members disassociate from me, or I just minimized engagement with them because they just didn't understand. And my energy at that time was not about quelling their insecurities and fears because of what surfaced when I was doing this for them. It was about trying to answer a question that no one had asked out loud. And so, as part of that, you have to get in the arena yourself, right? So I was looking at all these reasons why I was fired, and I had imagine the scene, Richard. I'm in a basement, I'm eating pizza, playing ping pong, and I've got these flip charts on a wall. And I'm like, why was I fired from this company? And what happened here? And I put all of this stuff out. I had like hundreds of different data points and stories. And I started to think, what's that saying? Like, if I could capture the essence of the quality that I had at the time, why was I getting into trouble, getting my wrist slapped, and being fired from an organization? And all of these five things kept coming up, and quite literally, I then started to look for synonyms of these concepts, and it was a play on words because fired just naturally evolved from those synonyms. And so fresh thinking is the first one. And that's basically, and there's more information of this on my website and other
Yes.
stuff that I can make available. But essentially, fresh thinking is the courage to dare to think and act differently. It's bringing new ideas, bold ideas to the table, and it means that you do that without any consideration of ego or politics. You're driven by something bigger, something greater. So everyone that thinks if you're a disruptor and you're a disturber and you get fired, then you must be a troublemaker. I'm not talking about, and I put it in my book, I'm not talking about that kind of person that gets fired. I'm talking about people that bring new ideas and are driven by something bigger than themselves, a purpose-driven leader. They get fired for bringing new ideas. So it's this idea of changing the way that we think. So the world of leadership is zagging, we're zigging, right? We're bringing new ideas, we're questioning narratives, we're shifting the way that we see information. Inquisitive. Do you want me to go through the others? You want me to just
Well,
go
yeah,
through?
let's talk about the inquisitive nature and
Okay.
let's spend a moment or two on each bullet there. I
Yeah.
think they're very important. It's the theme of your book, and the depth of your research was
Yeah.
the genesis of this book is from that experiential impact that all these firings have had on you. I gather you've been fired what, four times in some
Four
period of
times.
time. Okay.
Yeah, 4 times. Yeah.
Like, I don't know anybody else watching out there. Do you feel sorry for Paul, or do you feel inspired by Paul? I see one person, Nicole, says we need more of you. So
Oh, thank
that's that's a kudo, Paul. I think being fired hasn't disrupted your fresh thinking, or now your inquisitive nature. So tell us more about that.
Yeah, and I think underlying all of this is this concept, this taboo that being fired is a bad thing. So keep that in mind as I'm going through these qualities, because one of the things that my work is doing is shifting our understanding of what it means to be fired as a leader. And I'm not talking about, leaders that are fired for putting their hand in the cookie jar, or
Sure.
stealing post-it notes, or flying private jets when they're on, they shouldn't be, that kind of thing. I'm not talking about those. I'm talking about leaders that are fired for demonstrating these five qualities. These five qualities the research shows we need to evolve leaders for the future. it's also that these 5 qualities underpin our ability as a country level, industry level, organizational level to successfully prepare for the future economically. And
Hmm.
there's a whole bunch of research that I've got from Global Innovation Index reports and all sorts of stuff that categorically shows if we don't invest in these kinds of leadership qualities, we at every level will experience some challenges. So inquisitive nature, it draws on a lot of the work from Professor Francesca Gino from Harvard. So she talks about curiosity and the business case for curiosity. Inquisitive nature is similar in the sense that this is about leaders asking why. This is about
Yeah, that's
that.
my favorite. That's me
Yeah.
all the time. Why?
And they're driven by not just being that person in the room that's going, asking an annoying question. They're really, because they're a fired leader, by the way, and I tested this with other leaders and people I spoke with along the way, because they're driven by something bigger, they're not driven by ego. And
Hmm.
so, when you ask why a lot, you in a meeting, you can annoy people. And so the inquisitive nature is about setting the context of why I'm asking why and what I'm driven by. And therefore, it's that kind of multi-level approach. Like
Well, why asking the why gets to the root, right? Why? Why do we do this? Then why do we do that? How come this
yeah,
happens like that? Then you finally get to the root, right?
yeah, that also with all of these are interchangeable and they support and complement each other as qualities because all of these qualities lead to a leader's ability to disrupt their thinking to result in disruption which then leads to innovation and innovative
Hmm.
output. So the inquisitive nature is key to that, right? We thought the world was flat once, Richard, right?
Yeah.
And it was people that are exploring, asking why, and going beyond the boundaries when everyone said, "No, don't do that. That's not safe. That'll never work. We've never done that before. We tried it and it failed." Well, the inquisitive says, "Thanks. They're great data points, but I think that there's something else, and I'm going to go and try and find that out." So that's the I. The real and accountable, the R, is, and again, there's so many bumper stickers about this. There's so many hashtag movements. There's so many kind of corporate um, policies and programs on this, but essentially they're all missing the mark, I believe, and the research shows this. The R is you turn up who you are. You turn up as you are to your role as a leader, right? So you're not one thing outside of an office and another inside. And again, I'm simplifying this for the conversation here, but there's a lot more around this as a methodology and a framework and diagnostics and everything I've developed around these 5 qualities. And and I'm not talking about foosball tables or have a beer on Friday in the office being real. That's not what I'm talking about.
Hmm.
They're getting it. I'm talking about actually showing up as you are and being and owning who you are, and the accountable in that is being accountable to that. So being
Yeah.
accountable to being real, a self-regulatory lever, if you like, to be real. Um, the E is expressive and challenging, and that
Well,
is based.
just before you jump into the E, that really resonated with me because IM Day 2025 this past September, the tagline is "Feel Real Again," and that was the whole impetus is to help people feel real again. And you're just saying how important that is, but the accountability is upon ourselves to take on that chore to feel real again.
Yeah, and would without getting all esoteric here, but wouldn't we want to be real anyway?
Yeah,
Wouldn't
yeah.
wouldn't we want to, like when we close the door? Let's give you an example. When I get off this Substack with you, if I'm a fraud or incongruent and everything I've just said, I don't then practice what I preach,
Mhm.
like what damage is that doing to us at a cellular level? What da- you
Absolutely.
know, and so I think it just makes sense to be real, right? And look in the mirror, and I come to this when I talk about the D in direct and transparent, because that one is essentially about not playing the political game and practicing what you preach. And I use an example in the book actually. Every morning, most of us as humans and evening will brush our teeth. And that is a conscious decision we make because we know the impact of not brushing our teeth. Now, personally, I've just got into flossing in the last few years because it was something on my list to do, and I never did it. I sucked at it, and now I do it like every.
Gingivitis.
You got it. You got it. Because the impact of then not doing something has a bigger impact, right? So let me just take that back to the D, and then I'll go back to the
Okay.
E. Um, every morning you get up in the morning, you consciously choose if you brush your teeth or not. You know the impact of brushing. You know the impact of not. The same applies every morning or whenever you are going into an office environment and you're in a meeting with other peers or you're in a whatever the meeting is, you get the choice to decide whether you play the political game, right? That means, and let's translate that into tangibles. The boss idea. Remember, I said earlier, the boss, the guy, the guy or the girl that comes up with an idea and is your boss, and there's 12 other people in the room, and they ask for your honest feedback. What I do is I kind of in the corporate world, I was known for this, and this is I leveraged from A Few Good Men, that film with Jack Nicholson.
I
You know,
loved it.
when
Loved it.
when he's on the stand and Tom
Yeah.
Cruise's character saying, "Give me the truth," and he's saying, "You can't handle
You
the truth."
can't handle the
So,
truth.
so I did the same when someone like says to me, "Oh, give me your honest answer. Give me your," and I'm like, "Do you want the truth or a socially acceptable answer to you?" And
Yeah.
what I mean by that is if my answer is going to make you feel threatened in your role, all right? If it's going to make you pass me over for promotion, if it's going to make
Right.
not put
You're
me on
gonna
that project,
you're holding back. You're
right?
pulling in your reins.
Exactly. Now, I make I said it before. I say it publicly, and I firmly believe this. I make no judgment for where people are on their journey. My journey is my journey. My decisions have been mine. I'm certainly not advocating that everybody acts like me, but I am saying that we can create the environment and the conditions for us to start acting differently based upon someone's tolerance and appetite and life situation. So when we talk about politics, there's lots of research out there that says politics is a good thing. Shame on them. I actually
Yeah.
publicly challenge them, and I talk about the effect and the corrosive effect of politics on your health, on your organizational, the growth of your organization and your leadership journey. So what I'm saying is you get a choice to decide whether you play the political game or not. It's up to you. And we all have different crosses to bear and different nuances. So the D is really about um, are you able to practice what you preach, and are you able to do that from a place of knowing what you're about as a human and as a leader. And then the E, if I kind of reverse that back,
Yeah.
expressive and challenging. The E is really that speak up kind of culture that is challenging and being dissenting and providing dissenting perspectives, challenging the status quo. Again, I'm not talking about in a way where you go into a meeting and you shout and you're the loudest person in the room. Not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is thoughtful, professional, um, data driven, experiential ways of providing a different perspective about an idea. And that's having the courage to do that as well. Speaking up in a meeting. And
Mhm.
we all see it, don't we, Richard? Like we'll see some people that have so much to say and contribute, but because of the dynamics in a meeting, they'll be overshadowed, they won't speak, they'll be fearful, whatever the metric is for them that stops them speaking. I see a world where we'll create the five qualities as the blueprint and the DNA of how we now lead. And so those five qualities, someone when they were reviewing my book, they were like, "Th- this is so simple as an approach to leadership that it could fit on a post-it note, on a post-it
Yeah.
note." And I'm saying exactly because the world of academia and the world of leadership development has overcomplexed leadership. And as leaders, we're struggling. Right? We are struggling. And so simplification is key in all of this.
Well, I wrote down the one that speaks loudest actually knows the littlest, because it's like the Zen tradition, right? If you are speaking loudly and constantly, you don't have much to offer because you're trying to make up for that that by using that as a crutch. So how does expression and challenging the status quo, if you're the loudest one in the room, does that help you?
Well, again, I think focusing on the volume is not what I'm talking about here. It's
Yeah,
about standing behind the having the courage of your conviction of an idea. So that means the most, let's run that example. One of the most quietest people in a meeting may have the best idea in that meeting, and they may
absolutely.
feel intimidated by the person that speaks the loudest but may not have as much substance. The expressive and challenging quality is about how do we set that individual up who's the quietest. In fact, it's not about whether these qualities apply to certain types of leaders. They apply across the board. All right. So,
Hmm.
but how do you embed and institutionalize a different culture of leadership with different leadership qualities? So, in that example with the quiet contributor, I would be wanting to create the environment where they feel safe and comfortable and seen.
Right, right.
And whatever way that they want to express, whether that be they stand up on a flip chart, whether that be they put a note together and put it to the person at the front of the room, whatever way they want to, that they've got the environment that supports them to be expressive and challenging. Because again, we've got this misnomer that to be challenging means I have to be the loudest person in the room.
Mm, yeah.
Not at all. I can influence through different ways. I can
Hmm.
challenge you by actually asking you for more information about your data set or your philosophy. I can help build upon your ideas. Again, I'm challenging, but again, we I think my work in general has opened up a conversation about how we see things, how we label things. Like terms like being bold is considered a bad thing, but actually, you know, being bold leads to disruption, which leads to innovation. So in the end, these things, we normalize them and we celebrate them. So I think there's a lot of work. A lot of my work is about shifting the way that we see certain terminologies and the way we embrace certain terminologies. And
Okay.
that's partly why I called it Fired, because I
Hmm.
knew that it would make people, the wrong people, feel uncomfortable. It would make the right people think about things differently, and it would make us then have a global conversation, which it is, around the true state of leadership, and whether we're prepared for the future.
Okay, well, let's talk about that. The first thing you said was you used the word fired. When I hear the word fired, I think fired up, right? I think fired up. And you also spoke of acceleration. And then right now, technology is accelerating so rapidly. And I believe that 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 people, organizations aren't even understanding how rapid it's coming down and momentum is building and the fire is growing. So when we think about, like we just heard a few weeks back, Nvidia is now valuation is well over $4.5 trillion, more than a lot of different countries' GDPs. Like, how does that how that's just massive, massive rampant growth. What Elon Musk a 1.1 $1 trillion package remuneration call package that the board passed. So these are technologies that are going to affect us in the future. And how does the average person sitting at a desk or leading a small organization or even a large corporation rationalize this and deal with it as it's accelerating and firing up at a rapid pace?
Speak about this in different contexts as well, around the role of the increasing role that disruptive technologies play in our world, and the way that we as humans and leaders interact and integrate the way that we are with those technologies. Um, and I see this as a gift. Now that might sound a bit strange in terms of what do I mean by that. I While the rest of the world is and I was one of these people and still am to an extent, concerned with the impact that AI and the rapid acceleration of certain technologies is having
Sure.
on our ability to collaborate and be human and really essentially show up. Uh, I'm also aware that there's an opportunity in this, which, if you're a leader out there, once you so you have to. And I'm doing some work with Canvas leadership on this as well, and this is a whole area of growth for Canvas. It it provides us the opportunity to ask the question, what kind of leader do I want to be in an evolving era of AI and disruptive technologies? Which hasn't really been asked before, Richard, because a
Hmm.
lot of us are focused on, oh, it's taking our jobs and this and the speed of which we interact and everything is accelerating, and there's this challenge with us. How do we adopt that? How do we embrace that? And I get all of that. I get it. I understand it. I've experienced it and do experience it myself. I think the other side of the coin is to say, what does this now enable me to do as a leader? And few conversations are happening like that. We're focusing on the headlines rather than the depth that's in within the content of this era that we're now in. And I think we've got the opportunity to ask some really tough questions, which will evolve ourselves as leaders. And again, if we're open, if we're open to the conversation, I keep coming back to it. Everything that I do is about creating the conditions for honest conversations, and if we don't, then we're still missing the point,
So,
because that's the
like
foundation.
that is so truthful with asking the honest questions, and we're coming near the bottom of the hour. And I just wanted to point out that one of the things that you started with, and you say you start a lot of your conversations, is what questions aren't we asking? And that's what I think we want to leave. I want people to think about from our conversation here today is to take that back into your workplace or into your own thinking and ask what questions aren't we asking? And those may reveal, and I think that was part of your process in the basement eating pizza. What am I not asking?
Yeah.
Are the questions? What am I afraid to ask? Those are the things I think we need to be able to do.
Yeah, I think just building on that, it often, and we know this from time immemorial, as it were, the thousands of years of history have showed us this, that the area of discomfort is the area of greatest growth for us. And so we shy away consistently as humanity from looking in the mirror and having those uncomfortable, awkward conversations. So we suppress that, we deny it.
Mhm, mhm,
We have different, and this shows up at every level, right? As a human, in our romantic relationships, our social environments, but also in the workplace. And the way it shows up in the workplace is you have these concepts like quiet quitting, you have increased toxicity, you have
mhm.
increased turnover. All of these that I talk about in my book are symptoms of the fact that we're not asking the kinds of questions that we need to. Because
Okay,
if we ask the questions we need to, we will then come face to face with why these things are happening, like these symptoms. Then we get the opportunity and, quite honestly, the privilege to be able to address them. But we're not. I mentioned
okay.
earlier, Gallup, 7 trillion in disengagement when I started this path in 2017. That's now 8.9 trillion. So amidst everything that at a surface linear level we're talking about, we're putting into corporate policies, and we're putting into guiding principles for how people work in organizations. We're putting the values on the wall and all this great stuff, which I've done as a consultant for many
Mhm.
years,
Yeah,
15 different industries. But we're still not living them, Richard. We're
yeah.
still not embracing this stuff, because this is the stuff that helps to address those symptoms that I've mentioned. And again, there's much more detail in my book and my work if anyone's interested. Um, but yes, it starts by asking the questions that will make us uncomfortable. And my only suggestion and advice is to actually embrace that discomfort and see what that service is. There's a tool that I've developed that I call it Name What You See Moments. And it's essentially a very simple tool that a leadership team can use very, very quickly every time they meet. If they want to find out the true pulse, the true state of them as a leadership team, try this exercise and then see what happens. full caveat, if you don't have full trust in place, this exercise using this team is going to rip open and show some chasms in your leadership. I've used it many times, but you
Great.
have to have the safety and the trust in place. So full caveat. Go around the table and ask, okay, what's the biggest area that you're seeing now as a challenge and a toxic challenge in the organization? And then you vote as a
Yeah.
team on the one that you want to address in
Okay.
between meetings. And it's a very simple team exercise. It's something that works really clearly, very well if you're transparent and if you are open to asking those questions. Try it and see what happens.
That's amazing, and that's a great way to finish it up as offering to those that are watching today to perhaps look at that in their own organizations. And thank you, Nicole, for suggesting that this is a great idea. And thank you to Nicole for organizing our live today. Paul, as you know, she's been busy behind the scenes.
Mm.
And for those of you that want to get a copy of Paul's book, where can they find it?
Oh gosh, it's on my website, paulmacleadership.com. But it's also if people find me on LinkedIn, there's a link on LinkedIn as well, and you can clearly find it on Amazon as well.
Great.
Um, so yeah, it's a very distinguishable title. So uh, it's on a number of different platforms, but Amazon,
Excellent.
yeah.
Well, well, thanks, Paul. And Paul Mac, 73 is your handle here on Substack. If anybody wants to direct message Paul, he's available on Substack, Paul Mac 73 here. So thank you again, Paul. You shared a lot of insights and I think fired up a lot of people here today with the conversation. And hopefully they'll be able to take away and take on that accountability of delivering it back into their organizations, first within themselves and then their organizations. So thanks again. And oh, I see Bill just piped in at the end
Oh
here.
yeah.
It's great to
Hey,
see.
Bill.
Yeah. So thanks again. And Joe was on. There's so many others. We appreciate you all. It's wonderful to see you here. And until next time, we will light the candle again and carry on towards I Am Day. So thank you, Paul. Thanks for joining us. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Richard. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Bye now.